So Dennis Prager has decided to speak out once again about Candace Owens' nefarious lies, sinister conspiracy theories ranging from her hatred for Jews and Israel to Turning Point USA saying that they are somehow, and Erica's somehow involved in Charlie's assassination. I mean, it's sick stuff. Don't forget that both Prager, his organization PragerU, gave Candace a job after she left Turning Point, continued to expand her voice. I'm sure Ben Shapiro was involved in the hiring of her at the Daily Wire, both giving her voices. Now she's espousing values and ideas that so run counter to what they believe. I don't even know what values she's espousing. It's just nonsense. It seems to be just anything that can grow her attention and income. And Dennis is someone that believes that he's strongly felt for many years that the fight America needs has to be primarily with the far left, with the woke left. But at the same time, he's clearly feeling here that there's this growing issue of these voices like Candace and Tucker and others on the conservative side, and that there needs to be a bit of housekeeping that's done, moral housekeeping that's done. This isn't about silencing or deplatforming someone, but about providing moral clarity here. And so he's done just that in a recent interview. And I want to, this is at, I think the original interview was on the Media Line. And I want to read to you what he said when asked about Candace Owens, because he's providing some more clarity here. So first question to Dennis was as follows. Candace Owens has been at the forefront of the instigation of hate against Jews. This time she has come out with an attack list against the Jewish people in general, and Ben Shapiro specifically, saying that people who describe themselves as Talmudic Jews think that we are animals, that they have a right to own us, make us worship them, lie to us, sue us, take everything we have and deceive us. She recently urged her YouTube audience to study what the Talmud says, claiming that the Talmud encouraged Jews to be contract lords and that Jews were responsible for the transatlantic slave trade. She referenced Der Talmud Jude, the Talmudic Jew, written by August Rohling, who is an anti-Jewish German Catholic theologian who invoked the Old Blood libel that Jews consume human blood in murder rituals. Dennis, as a Jewish historian who knows Candace Owens, what do you say? Why is she dredging up conspiracy theories, and what impact is this having? Dennis replied, I studied in yeshiva for 14 years. I never encountered any one of these Talmudic ideas during my education. Neither did I, by the way. None of this is normative Judaism, even for those who study the Talmud. The only time I've ever heard any of these ideas has been in the context of someone citing them in an attempt to create hatred of Jews. People need to understand there are almost 2.5 million words in the Talmud. To put that into context, the entire Hebrew Bible has 305,000 words. There are nearly 1 million words in Shakespeare's collected works. So again, 2.5 million in the Talmud. The Talmud contains many laws, but it contains far more opinions of rabbis in the first centuries, which were written down and therefore preserved, many of which were arguments with rabbis on opposing sides of any given issue. Most of it is obscure and known to very few Jews, rarely studied and not binding upon Jews. Well, perhaps the arguments are. There are some halachic Jewish legal conclusions that arise from it. Furthermore, many such claims about what is in the Talmud are either taken out of context, distorted by mistranslation, or are outright fabrications. The words specifically cited here fall into one or more of these categories. In addition, it needs to be understood that some of the remarks uttered by a few rabbis over the course of centuries were made in the context of hostility towards Jews, as expressed by anti-Jewish laws enacted during the late Roman Empire. As with everything, context matters. My assumption about why Candace is raising these age-old allegations against Jews is that she believes they hold merit. But just as she urged her viewers to read about what Jews really think, I would urge those who follow Candace's book recommendation to also read Rohling's critics before forming your opinion about his reliability. Rohling's lack of scholarship was exposed during the pre-trial preparations by the defense in his 1883 libel suit against Rabbi Joseph Bloch, by experts who exposed his inability to read Aramaic or Hebrew Talmudic texts, and his fabricated quotes, forcing him to withdraw his lawsuit. It seems like Dennis is holding back from just saying, well, there's also just some bad faith going on with Candace. Whether she believes it or not, I'm honestly not so sure, to be honest. Maybe she does, but I think a lot of it, well, at least part of it, is just doing what she wants to do to gain views. She probably does believe it as well. She probably does. And maybe she's drawing on, unfortunately, some anti-Semitic traditions within Christianity. I don't know whether it's just other kind of resentments going on here. But it's all kind of a mix of ugly, illogical thinking, immoral thinking that's going on here. The next question. Before I read the next question, by the way, and continue with this segment, please do hit the subscribe button below the video in the YouTube, under the YouTube video. It helps you to stay up to date with the videos, and it also really helps us to grow. So thank you so much. Next question is equally disturbing. Candace Owens called on Black Americans to turn their angst against Jews instead of holding grudges against white Americans. Will her race card even work? Dennis replied, Candace, addressing fellow black people, said Ben Shapiro, based on his self-description as a Talmudic Jew, not only hates her, but he hates you too, white men. He hates all black people. She appears to be saying the book she read about Talmudic values said the Talmud teaches hatred of all non-Jews, that they're to be viewed as inferiors. She went on to say it was not so much white people who enslaved and sold black people, but rather Jews who were responsible for the slave trade. She cited no source for this, other than to say, they've buried a lot of it, but it's there, and you can find it. I hope people, black, white, Jewish and Christian, take up her challenge and do some reading on the subject. Two thoroughly researched resources on this topic are Jews and the American Slave Trade by Saul S. Friedman and Jews, Slaves and the Slave Trade, Setting the Record Straight by Ellie Faber. In 1995, the American History Association felt compelled to issue a statement condemning the misuse of history to claim Jews were disproportionately involved in the slave trade, and then there's a link to the full statement. But even if the claim that Jews were predominant in the slave trade was historically true, what would be the point of raising it now? This is the same point I made, other than to make modern-day black people hate modern-day Jews. That seems to be Candace's point. And by the way, it's so ironic because she made a video a few years ago about how we need to move on from the fact that there was a slave trade, the black community in America, because this idea that we should hate white people en masse today because of that is counterproductive. And yet, and also ignoring the fact that it was white people in America and Britain that put this to an end and have tried to, make amends and move forward and repent in many ways. And so it's like she's saying, that's a past thing and we need to move on and try to have as much, equal opportunity and equality as we can moving forward. But now she's saying total opposite, contradicting herself, that because the Jews did this in the past, the Jews were responsible for the slave trade, even though saying that is ridiculous, therefore we must now hate all Jews moving forward. What? So, as Dennis continues, on what grounds do today's black people have any quarrel with today's Jews? Besides the obvious immorality of holding people alive today responsible for the actions of people who came before them, no non-black group in America fought as hard for civil rights for black people as did Jews. Martin Luther King Jr. noted near the end of his life that probably, quote, probably more than any other ethnic group, the Jewish community has been sympathetic and has stood as an ally to the Negro in his struggle for justice. That remains true of America's Jews today. I've never heard Candace give Jews credit for that. Next question. She's also playing a religious card claiming Jews are pitting Christians against Christians and Christians versus Muslims. Who can set the record straight? Dennis replied, Candace implored her viewers to wake up to these people who believe that they are contract lords. Wake up to who publishes these books and who keeps us warring with one another. It's unclear to me what she's referring to here. She didn't say what books these books are, but presumably they're written by Jews. I don't know what books Jews have written that cause warring between Jews and Christians or Christians and Muslims. Perhaps that was a reference to the books of the Talmud and other ancient Jewish literature. Her reference to contract lords appears to come from another comment she made in the same video, in which she spoke to Ben Shapiro and your people, meaning Jews, saying what he and other Jews really believe is Baal Brith, not a Hebrew phrase I've ever heard, but one that literally means owners of the covenant. I think this is a misunderstanding on Candace's part, similar to the way in which she once misunderstood the Muslim and Jewish quarters of Jerusalem as areas of the city those groups were mandated to live in and or were excluded from. She uses a similar but not identical term, contract, rather than covenant, and based on what she said in that episode, appears to believe it means Jews think they are contract lords, such that people, presumably meaning non-Jews, are not allowed to violate contracts, presumably with Jews, or you, the Jews, will ruin them. The Hebrew phrases I'm familiar with is B'nai Brith, which means sons of the covenant, a reference to the covenant God made in Genesis with Abraham and his descendants, who became the Jews. It has nothing to do with contracts between people. Incidentally, the Talmud requires Jews to be ethical in their contracts and other business dealings with non-Jews. To the extent that Christians are pitted against one another, I don't see how Jews are in any way responsible. Christians have had all kinds of disputes, sometimes violently so, for centuries. And to the extent Christians and Muslims are pitted against one another, I don't see how Jews are responsible for that either. Muslim societies have been hostile places for Christians throughout much of Islamic history. What's going on in Nigeria, for example, with Muslims massacring Christians on a regular basis, around 62,000 since 2000, does not in any way involve Jews. Next question. When someone hears Owens accuse Erica Kirk and other Turning Point USA leaders of involvement in Charlie Kirk's assassination, how do you challenge her claims? Dennis said, I've yet to see evidence that anyone Charlie knew, much less anyone he loved, was in any way involved in his killing. And now the clincher question. Question, is Candace at Owens an anti-Semite? Dennis replied, I can only do what we all can. Evaluate her public statements. First, I must define what constitutes anti-Semitism. An anti-Semite is someone who hates Jews for being Jews, and or someone who believes the only country in the world that should be destroyed is the Jewish one. I don't believe Candace has said anything that indicates she hates Jews just for being Jews. It's not fully clear to me, based on her public statements to this point, whether Candace opposes the existence of the State of Israel. She has said some things that imply that is her view, such as her claim that the Zionist movement in the early part of the 20th century was led by members of a sex cult called Frankism, and that protection of paedophiles is one of Israel's purposes, as well as its current practice. That suggests illegitimacy. It's clear that she fiercely opposes the current government of Israel because she believes it has committed war crimes, including genocide, which I've never heard her define, in its battle against Hamas in Gaza since October 7th. Because I don't believe Hamas, I think she's wrong on the facts, but I don't have a reason to think she doesn't genuinely believe the claims made by Hamas, through the Gaza Ministry of Health, about the death toll in the wake of the vicious October 7th attack. Having said that, I don't know why she believes Hamas is a credible source of information about Israel. That strikes me as illogical. What is also not clear to me is why she doesn't assign moral blame, primarily or at least equally, to Hamas for A, starting the war in the first place, and B, using tactics such as taking hostages, firing from civilian infrastructure, wearing civilian clothing, and mingling amongst civilians, designed to draw fire at innocent civilians, particularly children, resulting in the images that horrify me as much as they do her. I've not heard her condemn Hamas for getting Palestinian children killed. I've not heard her condemn Hamas for proudly targeting civilians, including children, in Israel. Even if she is not anti-Semitic herself, she says she is not, it is unquestionable, based on the social media comments I have seen, that she is leading many of her followers to anti-Semitism, to see Jews as manipulating the world, especially America. Her portrayal of Israeli callousness is unwarranted and unfair. Next question. She worked for Prager. What changed her? Answer. I can only surmise the answer to this question based on what she said. She believes she was subjected to pro-Israel propaganda, which she accepted because she had no reason not to, and has since had her eyes open to what she now sees as the reality. That Israel is demonic, her word. She believes this is uniquely true of Israel because she believes it was founded by members of a Jewish sex cult called Frankism. It was responsible for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and until the ceasefire was attempting to eradicate the population of Gaza. She has publicly said a real Holocaust has taken place in Gaza at the hands of Israel, which is engaged in planned ethnic cleansing and the mass murder of children of its Arab population so that Israel can take over the land. She has not said much about the actions of other countries, past or present, engaged in a hot war. Israel is not the only country whose munitions have caused devastation to civilian infrastructure in the course of fighting a war. In contrast to Israel, for which she has presented no evidence that there has been deliberate targeting of civilians, in fact, the opposite, Israel has repeatedly warned the civilian population to move out of the way of its fire, I haven't heard her refer to the Muslims in Nigeria who have been deliberately slaughtering tens of thousands of Christian men, women, and children in a campaign to eradicate the Christian population from their midst, and she hasn't called that demonic. I haven't heard her comment on what I consider to be the demonic tactic used by the Soviet Union in targeting children in Afghanistan by dropping toys stuffed with explosives so that when a child found one and picked it up, her arm would be blown off. I don't think she's accused Britain of being demonic for the bombing of civilians in Dresden, the United States of being demonic for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan or fighting the Vietnam War, or more recently the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, all of which maimed and killed massive numbers of civilians, including children. The point is, when only one nation of all those in the world is singled out as demonic for war casualties, it seems there's a different standard for that one, and it's troubling. Once someone begins to see Jews and or their state as a problem for the world, they tend to see that dynamic at work everywhere. I don't know whether Candace has fully arrived at that point, but she appears to be headed in that direction. Next question. On September 4th, 2024, you sent her a long letter concerning her diatribes. You have yet to hear back? He said, I had a phone conversation with Candace 3 weeks after sending that letter, just before I made it public. She told me it was her intent to respond point by point, but to my knowledge, she has never done so. We covered that letter, by the way, a few years ago. It was quite popular on our channel. Final question. What are the dangers posed by such criticisms of Israel by Owens, Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson and others for Jews, Christians, particularly regarding their support for Israel, and even the Republican Party amid conservative divisions? Dennis replied, the danger for all of us, Jews, Christians, Republicans, is that we'll divide over false premises. The primary one here being that Jews and or Israel are behind much of the world's problems and fracture a coalition that is critical to maintaining America as we've known it. The most important thing for all of us to do is engage in civil dialogue, carefully define our terms so that we're all using the same words to mean the same things, and in good faith hash out what are facts and what are the false claims and assumptions, cite sources, and clarify over what we differ and why. As always, Dennis shows a lot of clarity here, and I wanted to actually bring you back in just my reaction to one of the things that he said earlier on, when he said, I don't believe Candace has said anything that indicates she hates Jews for being Jews. It's not fully clear to me. She has said some things that imply her view, such as she opposes the state of Israel, but the key line is, it's not that she seems to hate Jews just for being Jews. And I think he's tapping into something real there. It's something that it's a story people tell themselves about the Jews. Now, what is that story? What is it that makes people so resentful to Jews? What narrative do they have in their heads? Well, as Dennis has cited time and time again, and he brought this to our attention. In fact, his book over here, right over here, is Why the Jews? And he actually signed that for me when I saw him a few years ago. And he cites the line in the Talmud. He said to me that, the Talmud spends pages and pages debating how wide and tall a sukkah can be. But when it comes to the question of antisemitism, something that historians dedicate their lives to understanding, the Talmud summarizes it in a sentence. The Sinah, which is Hebrew for hatred, of the anti-Semites comes from Sinai. They're doing a play on words. Sinah comes from Sinai, Mount Sinai. The hatred to the Jews is because they were chosen by God to be his light to the world, his vessel, his chosen people who were destined with bringing God's moral vision, his values, God himself, bringing God into the world. And whether Candace is coming at this from a theological viewpoint that maybe has some kind of jealousy towards that, an emotional viewpoint that has some kind of resentment towards that, a conspiratorial viewpoint, which basically looks at the Jews and thinks, I want to push conspiracy theories here, and I see there's this weird story here of Jewish success, despite Jews being few in number, persecuted, scattered all over the world throughout most of their history, and yet they return to their land. They've succeeded. They've dramatically impacted the world's conversation. You look at that, and it's like such low-hanging fruit for conspiracy theorists. Or, if you choose not to go down that dark path, if you choose not to turn to jealousy or resentment or indignation, you actually see a divine light here. But of course, if you go down the dark path, well, darkness hates light. And so it will push against it and fight against it. For people that do support the Jews, and for Jewish people, the fact that it is the, our haters throughout history represent the darkest and most sick ideologies out there, we should really see this as a compliment to ourselves and remind us that we have something really important to offer the world. In fact, something essential to offer the world. So much of the world's moral progress has been because of the ideas brought to the world by the Torah, by the Hebrew Bible. Charlie Kirk said that to me. He said, you wouldn't have America without the Torah. America's foundation is from the Hebrew Bible. They hardly quoted the New Testament you think about the founding structures, documents, founding fathers' words of America. They quoted the Old Testament because that provides an actual moral structure and framework. And so the anti-Semites are right about one thing. They keep pointing to the Jews as the source of the problem. We don't actually disagree with them. It's just that it's not that our actions have caused the problems. Our actions have actually helped the situation, but it's that we have more to do. It's not what Jews are doing. It's what we're not doing. It's that we have more to do still to heal the world's conscience, morality, godliness. And so the focus and attention on Israel, that's happening for a reason. And they're right to think that the Jews are at the center of all this. It's just that their prescription is wrong. And therefore, like Dennis has been devoting his life to, all of us have to double down in recommitting to not just living those values, but speaking about them and sharing them and opening people's eyes to this. The time for that is now. A quick message. We all hear about the Palestinian displacement, or Nakba, of 1948. But there was another, even greater displacement that we haven't been told about. Nearly 1 million Jews were expelled from Arab lands at the exact same time. Watch the trailer for our new and absolutely essential documentary called The Real Nakba. And if you want to watch the full film, just click the link below in the video description. We've all been told about the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948. Around 700,000 Arabs were displaced. But here's what you're rarely told. That displacement didn't come from some Jewish plan for genocide. It wasn't Israel's goal. It wasn't Israel's desire. It happened because Arab leaders launched a war of annihilation. They tried to wipe out the newborn Jewish state, vowing to drive the Jews into the sea. And in the chaos of that war, people fled. Many because their leaders told them to, promising they'd return after victory. But the term Nakba was originally used to describe the fact that the Arabs lost the war, not the displacement. Now the term describes the displacement of war used as a political weapon against Israel. But there was another Nakba you haven't been told about. A catastrophe rooted not in the fog of war, but in the clear, deliberate desire for persecution and genocide. It happened at the very same time, and it led to even more displacement. Yet most of the world has never heard of it. Over 850,000 Jews, more than the number of displaced Arabs, were driven from their homes across the Arab world. Communities that had thrived for millennia were uprooted overnight. Families stripped of citizenship, of property, of dignity, assaulted, expelled, forced to flee with nothing but their faith. Why? Because they were Jews. Because Israel dared to exist. Because the Arab League openly orchestrated it, drafting plans in 1947 to freeze Jewish bank accounts, seize property, and intern Jews as enemy nationals. This is the real Nakba, a catastrophe born of pure anti-Semitism. In this JTV documentary, we'll journey country by country, from Baghdad to Cairo, from Sana'a to Tripoli, uncovering buried truths and survivor voices. And no, this isn't a tale of victimhood, it's a saga of endurance, courage, and triumph. Because the Jewish people didn't just survive this Nakba, we rebuilt, we came home. In Israel, our phoenix soared from the ashes. So buckle up and let's dive in. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.